Tonight, breaking news: demonstrations continue against controversial proposed pandemic legislation in Victoria as nooses and gallows appear outside the state's parliament. The PM now denouncing real or threatened violence. But why are some people so angry? It's Sunday, the 21st of November. You're watching 6 News also tonight. Austria imposes a total lockdown on both vaccinated and unvaccinated people, mandating the jab for the entire population, but it seems some are mixing up the European nation with Australia. We'll fact check the false claims. And Dan Andrews on track for a third term as Victorian Premier, according to the first major news poll since the so-called Dan slide of 2018. The coalition needing to pick up 19 seats to form a majority government, but currently they're on track to lose 7. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Later this hour, a pretty big announcement about how we'll be reporting daily COVID cases starting tonight. Plus, Kyle Rittenhouse acquitted of all charges over last year's shootings in Kenosha, Wisconsin. US President Joe Biden urging peaceful protest, but adding he is angry and concerned with the verdict. But first tonight, nooses and gallows have appeared outside Victoria's Parliament in recent days as Kill the Bill protests take a disturbing turn. Death threats have been made against Premier Dan Andrews, but menacing words turned to violent action for one MP, Animal Justice Party's Andy Medic. His daughter was apparently spray painting over an anti-vaccination poster when a man started arguing with her. Police say she threw the spray can towards him before he threw it at the back of her head. That landed her in hospital, and Medic says it turned my worst fears into reality. Victorian MPs have been subject to a new wave of threats and intimidation as the government pushes to get the controversial pandemic legislation approved. Critics of the bill say it's a power grab, and some protesters are threatening any politician who dares to support it. It's a concerning trend seen right across the nation, so much so that Prime Minister Scott Morrison was forced to denounce real or threatened violence. Chief reporter Connor Aforke digs deeper, discovering why some people are so angry.
This is the Public Health and Wellbeing Amendment Bill, 116 pages of proposed legislation that have erupted a political furore in Victoria. According to its supporters, the bill takes the key learnings of COVID-19 to effectively manage future pandemics, promising transparency with the stipulation that the Chief Health Officer's medical advice must be made public. It's described in the memorandum as important to democracy with appropriate checks and balances. To its detractors, it's the exact opposite, a power grab by the government. A key feature of the bill, the Premier will be able to make a pandemic declaration, where this was once the purview of the Chief Health Officer. Under a pandemic declaration, the Health Minister can impose pandemic orders, or in other words, restrictions. So even when a pandemic becomes endemic, does this give the Victorian government power to rule by decree? Disgraced former Minister Adam Somyurek decided to vote against the legislation, saying it gives the government too much power. That's left the Andrews government scrambling to find one more crossbench member to support the bill. It's right now stalled in the upper house. If passed, it'll replace Victoria's state of emergency power, which is set to expire on December 15. If it's not passed by that date, the government will be unable to enforce restrictions like mask wearing or isolation orders. Now, it's against this backdrop that thousands have turned out to protest over the past few weeks. On Saturday, thousands of protesters converged on Melbourne, beginning at Bourke Street before gathering outside State Parliament. It was a tale of two protests. Some turned out for the so-called Freedom Rally, protesting vaccine mandates, COVID restrictions, and the pandemic bill. They carried Australian flags, Eureka flags, Trump flags, and even QAnon-inspired placards. Others were there for a counter-protest. Calling themselves anti-fascists, they railed against anti-vax sentiment. Police tried to keep the peace, forming a line to separate these diametrically opposed rallies, amid fears the demonstrators could clash and turn violent. They're scenes which were replicated right across the country. This was Sydney.
My dad's so funny.
This was Brisbane. Adelaide, Darwin and Perth also saw protests. They were, for the most part, peaceful. It follows a week of violent rhetoric amid ongoing protests in Melbourne. Nooses were hung and gallows hauled before the state parliament in ugly scenes last weekend. Victorian MPs have been subject to a new wave of threats and intimidation, with protesters coming after any MP who dares to support the bill. Animal Justice MP Andrew Medic said, "My worst fears turned into reality after a man threw a spray can at the back of his daughter's head, landing her in hospital." Medic's daughter is understood to have been spray painting over an anti-vaccination poster when the alleged attacker started arguing with her. Police say she threw the can towards him before he threw it at the back of her head. Video shows the moment she fled to a nearby shop. A police investigation is ongoing, but Medic says he has reason to believe the attack was related to his support for the pandemic bill. Scott Morrison took to Twitter to condemn the violence, calling it an attack on our very democracy. But this incident doesn't exist in a vacuum.
There are some people who are threatening me, they're threatening my family. They are essentially attacking the safety of my family. Be really clear and hear this message. I will not be deterred from the work I'm doing to keep every family safe.
There's been death threats, there's been threats to rape my staff, there's been people threatening to bomb my office.
WA Premier Mark McGowan was forced to close his electoral office after anti-vax extremists made rape, death and bomb threats against his staff. It follows the decision to mandate vaccines for most workers. Scott Morrison has repeatedly called for an end to vaccine mandates. State leaders have accused him of fueling the anti-vax movement as tensions flare in the latest war of words.
They should be able to go and get a cup of coffee in Brisbane when you're over 80%, regardless of whether you've had the vaccines or not.
Now we see the Prime Minister wanting to undermine Queenslanders as well, Mr Speaker, by his reckless comments.
He is so desperate to claw together a coalition of anti-vaxxers for his own political benefit that he is undermining confidence in our vaccine rollout.
Central Queensland Labor MP Brittany Lauger says she was sent threats of terrorism, extremism and violence. Other MPs and local doctors also reportedly received threatening messages. There's not been a life-threatening attack against an Australian politician in recent years, but they live, nonetheless, under constant threat of attack. Pandemic frustrations, increased political polarisation, and a rise in extremist rhetoric on social media and from politicians have all been cited as contributors to this worrying trend.
The NT Chief Minister says there is a very real possibility that there are people with COVID-19 in Katherine who don't know it. Michael Gunner has confirmed that the positive infections in both Robinson River and Katherine this week are linked to the Darwin-Katherine outbreak from just under a fortnight ago. Anyone who has shown symptoms at any time in the past few weeks is being urged to get tested for the virus. A rapid assessment team is now performing COVID tests in the Binjari community. Authorities hoping the virus hasn't spread to other remote areas where vaccination rates may be lower. Victoria is wrapping up the first weekend of further eased restrictions to mark 90% of the state being fully vaccinated. Density limits are no longer in place, masks are no longer needed to enter buildings, and the return to the office has begun for the fully vaccinated. Masks are still required for indoor retail, hospitals, public transport and more, but large-scale events like the Boxing Day test can now go ahead at the MCG with a full crowd of 100,000 people. Well, Australia has implemented a total lockdown on both vaccinated and unvaccinated people as COVID-19 cases continue to rise, mandating the jab for the entire population from February 2022. Of course, that's not true, at least in terms of the country. You see, we're talking about Austria, one of many European countries right now seeing a surge in infections, but it seems some are getting confused. Let's go to Google Maps now. As you see there, the two countries are over 14,000 kilometres away from each other, and despite the somewhat similar names, they also both have different flags. Here's the Austrian flag, and here's the Australian flag. Despite some news reports online, there's also no such thing as the Australian Chancellor. On Twitter, the term Australia lockdown is still a reasonably popular search term, even though that is misleading. Our only national lockdown was in early 2022. This year, when some places have been in lockdown, others haven't been. A capital, Canberra, and our two biggest cities, Sydney and Melbourne, have also been recently easing restrictions. Australia has not locked down the unvaccinated, as this post suggests. The closest thing was a brief lockout for parts of the Northern Territory early this month. In all lockdowns, vaccinated people and unvaccinated people were subject to the exact same restrictions. Prime Minister, not Chancellor, Scott Morrison, recently spoke about vaccine mandates. Here's some of what he had to say.
Over the last couple of years, governments have been telling Australians what to do. Now, there's been a need for that as we've gone through the pandemic, but the time is now to start rolling all of that back. Our position on mandatory vaccines, for example, is in very specific circumstances. We're not in favour of mandatory vaccines imposed by the government. Businesses can make their own choices under the law, but we're not about telling them what to do or telling Australians what to do. Vaccines.
Now, this video was widely attributed to unvaccinated people protesting against the new measures in Austria, though not unexpectedly some have said it was Australia. Either way, it's a total lie. The video is from 2019 and does appear to be soccer fans. Now, unfortunately, it is unlikely these false claims will be stopping anytime soon, some of them getting hundreds or even thousands of likes. If you do see a false claim, send them the link to this report and tell them there's no kangaroos in Austria. If you do see something you want fact-checked, make sure you tag or DM at 6newsau or send us an email, contact@6newsau.com. We'll keep fact-checking people, even if they don't want to listen, because even as Twitter updates how they label misinformation, there are still plenty of tweets with lies and falsehoods. Well, changing pace now, where Daniel Andrews is on track for a third term as Victorian Premier. That's according to the first major news poll since the so-called Dan slide in 2018. The coalition needing to pick up 19 seats to form a majority government, but currently they're on track to lose 7. This is all despite protests happening for months against the Premier and the government, but the latter's voice is actually in the minority. Reporter Lincoln Holmes has the details.
Thousands protest on the streets of Melbourne amid growing pressure for the Victorian government to scrap its controversial proposed pandemic bill. A smaller counter-protest was also seen, with protesters marching in opposition to the far right. But despite growing anger, a branch stacking scandal, and a total of 6 lockdowns, Daniel Andrews is set to win a third term in office.
The people of Victoria have today overwhelmingly endorsed a positive and optimistic plan for our state.
In the first major news poll since the 2018 state election, Labor's primary vote increased from 42.9% to 44%. On a two-party preferred basis, Labor leads the coalition 58 to 42%, with the Liberals at 36% of the primary vote. The opposition changed their leaders after their loss 3 years ago, but Matthew Guy returned to the top job after a spill earlier this year.
It's time to put these issues to bed, because Victorians want the Liberal Party focused on Victorians and not on ourselves.
The Australian reports that 56% of people are pleased with Andrews' personal performance, and the November 11 to 17 polling showed 60% thought Daniel Andrews had handled the COVID-19 crisis well. Women aged under 34 were most likely to approve of how Daniel Andrews has handled the pandemic, while men aged over 65 were more likely to disapprove, according to news.com.au. Protests are likely to continue next week as the debate over the proposed pandemic bill continues. Lincoln Holmes, 6 News.
And as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Do you think Labor will win the next Victorian state election in November next year? And if so, do you want them to win? Have your say by using hashtag 6newsau in the comments or on social media, or email your feedback, contact@6newsau.com. Overseas now, drivers in the UK will not be allowed to take photos or videos with their mobile phones when tough new laws come into effect. While it is already illegal to text or make a phone call, the new rules go even further by banning drivers from taking photos or videos, scrolling through playlists, or playing mobile games. You'll also not be allowed to use devices when at a red traffic light or stuck in traffic. Those caught breaking the rules face a £200 fine, which is around 371 Australian dollars. The new laws come into effect next year. Schools in New Delhi have been forced to close indefinitely over a worsening pollution crisis. Some coal-burning power plants have been shut down, with smog seen in the capital and other parts of India. According to the ABC, pollution levels rose to severe this month, with the air quality index going as high as 499 on a scale of 500. Coal makes up 70% of the country's power. Kyle Rittenhouse has been acquitted of all charges over last year's shootings in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where he shot 3 people, killing 2. The 18-year-old pleading self-defense over what happened during that nighttime Black Lives Matter protest. President Joe Biden has urged those upset with what happened to protest peacefully, but added he is angry and concerned with the verdict. US correspondent Jackson Gosnell has the latest developments.
Good evening, Leo. Monitoring a big story here in the U.S. Within the last few hours, we learned that Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty on all charges related to shootings that he conducted in Kenosha, Wisconsin in August of 2020. He was at injustice protest after police shot Jacob Blake, a man of color. And we do know at this time that as a result of all of that, he was there to put out fires, render medical aid when it was necessary, and so on and so forth. At those protests, things got very violent. Things were on fire, so on and so forth, and Rittenhouse went there with an AR-15 style rifle. He used it and shot 3 people. 2 died, 1 was seriously injured, and the one took the witness stand there at the trial, where he basically confirmed that Rittenhouse shot him only when he pointed a gun at Rittenhouse himself. And that kind of threw off the prosecution because he was their star witness, and so a lot of people say the prosecution did not do a very good job in this case, but many people upset regardless of how you look at the case on both ends. Some are upset that he did not get found guilty. Others are upset that there was even a trial and he had to be found not guilty and acquitted. Many saying this shouldn't have even went to a trial because it was self-defense. The attorney saying today that he was certainly relieved as that verdict was read in that Kenosha County Courthouse. Rittenhouse fell to the floor, had to be gotten up off the floor by his attorneys. He was given water, he hugged his attorneys, and was swept out of there. We do know that Rittenhouse has yet to do any interviews, but he is expected to appear on Fox News with Tucker Carlson on Monday in America, and so we will be watching that for sure. Personally, I know a lot of people who've requested interviews but have yet to hear back, and of course, as we know what he says in his account of this gigantic story, we'll be sure to bring that to you. It is important to note regarding this incident that there were 3 weeks of this trial and several days of deliberations until that jury unanimously found him not guilty. Reactions started pouring in instantly. The President of the United States, Joe Biden, had tweeted something alleging that he was a white supremacist, he being Kyle Rittenhouse, during the campaign, but walking back those comments in a way because he was asked by reporters his reaction to the verdict. He says he stands by what the jury has concluded, and the jury system works and we must abide by it. But he did go on to issue a statement saying he understands why some Americans are upset, and he encouraged them to lawfully protest. I'll continue to monitor the very latest, but for now, reporting from the 6 News U.S. headquarters, I'm Jackson Gosnell. Back to you.
Kamala Harris has made history becoming the first woman to ever hold presidential power in the US. For 85 minutes, the vice president became the acting president when Joe Biden underwent a routine physical at the Walter Reed Military Hospital outside Washington. America has never had a female president, and Harris is the first ever female vice president. As I'm sure you recall, in 2016, Hillary Clinton became the first female presidential candidate to receive electoral votes and win the national popular vote, though she did end up losing to Donald Trump. With all these recent developments regarding William Tyrrell here at home, it's worth taking a look back at how we got to this stage. Now, shortly before 10:30 a.m. on Friday, September 12, 2014, William, then aged 3, was playing in the yard of his foster grandmother's home on Benaroon Drive, Kendall, when he disappeared. At 10:56 a.m, his foster mother phoned 000 to report him missing, police arriving 10 minutes later. Hundreds of residents, emergency service workers and volunteers searched homes, forests, creeks and paddocks throughout the rural town township, but William could not be located. This was the last photo of him before he vanished. He was wearing that Spider-Man suit, the image becoming synonymous with the case. We've got more details on our social media pages and our website, 6newsau.com. Water sport now, and the fallout is continuing after Australian Test cricket captain Tim Paine stood down from the role over a sexting scandal. In an emotional press conference held in Hobart, Paine said it was a difficult decision but the right one for me, my family and cricket. The shock announcement coming just 3 weeks out from the Ashes series opener. Senior reporter Darby Travers has more.
Well, it was the bombshell announcement that shocked the cricketing world, and tonight the fallout is continuing after Tim Paine announced his resignation as the Australian Test cricket captain. In an emotional press conference held in Hobart, Paine revealed that nearly 4 years ago I was involved in a text exchange with a then colleague. He went on to say that he deeply regretted the incident at the time and still does today.
I recently became aware that this private text exchange was going to become public. On reflection, my actions in 2017 do not meet the standard of an Australian cricket captain or the wider community.
Cricket Australia now says it was a mistake not to speak publicly about the investigation in 2018. Paine was scheduled to play in a match yesterday, but it was called off due to rain. When approached by the media, he did not make any comments. The story has made headlines right across the world and especially in the UK, just 3 weeks out from the Ashes series beginning here at home. Sky Sports dubbed it as a career in Ashes, while a Daily Mail correspondent accused Cricket Australia of cultural issues. The story has also been big news in India and even the US, with CNN reporting on the text message exchanges. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comment section below by using the hashtag 6newsau or email contact@6newsau.com.
Changing pace completely now, a man in China has been banned from an all-you-can-eat barbecue for eating too much. The man, known only as Mr. Kung, told Hanun TV that he was prohibited from entering the buffet after eating up to 4 kilograms of prawns on a single visit. He says it's discriminatory against people who can eat a lot, but the restaurant owner says it's costing the business too much. It's a story straight out of The Simpsons, where, if you'll recall, Homer was banned from the Frying Dutchman before suing them.
"'Tis no man, 'tis a remorseless eating machine. Arr.
The story has gone viral on social media in China, the BBC reporting it's got more than 250 million views on Weibo. I mean, it does say all you can eat, so maybe he's in the right. Have your say by using hashtag 6newsau in the comments or on social media, or again, email your feedback, contact@6newsau.com. Now is Arvin and Sarah with a look at what's coming up later tonight on WAMN News.
Thanks, Leo. Tonight on WAMN News, medical experts explain how West Aussies can avoid Victoria's COVID school disaster. An exclusive Q&A with Dr. Andrew Miller.
Also tonight, explosive revelations about Marlon John's death prompt a push for more cultural awareness training.
Perth's water crisis. Our groundwater is disappearing fast as climate change bites.
And on WP, should school leavers take farm work during their holidays? Plus, Dr. Mark Duncan-Smith's comment. Join us tonight on the WAMN News Facebook page and YouTube channel.
Right, thanks both Arvin and Sarah there. Now tomorrow's forecast right across the country. Brisbane, thunderstorms expected at a top of 25, 19 degrees in Sydney, 20 degrees in the nation's capital Canberra, 22 in Melbourne, 18 in Hobart, 25 and partly cloudy in Adelaide, 33 in Alice Springs with heat expected there, 22 degrees in Perth, and a warm top of 34. And finally tonight, as we teased earlier, we've got a pretty big announcement about how we'll be reporting daily COVID-19 case numbers. Simply, we won't be. Now, we'll still be occasionally mentioning them. For example, if somewhere's going into restrictions or a total lockdown because of case numbers here in Australia, I think it is relevant to mention them. But in terms of our nighttime wrap-ups that we've been doing for several weeks now, they'll stop. And in fact, they have stopped. You might have noticed that. Obviously, COVID-19 cases still an important factor, but not as important, much less important. The main factors really are hospitalisations, ICU, ventilators, and of course the vaccination rates. And as vaccination rates go up, we're seeing less of hospitalisations and ICU COVID-19 cases. Obviously, it depends, but it's certainly something that doesn't matter as much. So we'll keep bringing you the latest COVID-19 information. We'd love to hear your feedback on this. Go to our social media pages or send us an email, contact@6newsau.com. But yeah, quite frankly, I think a lot of people are sick of hearing these cases, so we'll keep bringing you the latest information, but just a little differently, because at 6 News, we do these things differently, and we're grateful for your support. And that is 6 News for this Sunday evening. You can start Sunday with the latest headlines by heading to our website, 6newsau.com, and by following us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. Search 6 News AU to find us. I'm Leonardo Puglisi. Thanks for your company. Good night.